Hello, and welcome back to the channel, and to a tale of supernatural encounters that has puzzled Hollywood for decades. We explore the ghostly presence that many believe still haunts the former estate of legendary actor Errol Flynn. The stories you're about to hear come from real documented accounts by multiple witnesses, including author Robert Matson, members of the Nelson family, and the Christian Hamblin family, who lived on the property for 20 years. These aren't urban legends or Hollywood gossip, but experiences reported by credible people who had no reason to lie about what they saw and felt. Errol Flynn was one of Hollywood's biggest stars during the 1930s and 1940s. Known for his swashbuckling roles in movies like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood, Flynn was the perfect movie hero, handsome, athletic, and charming. But off-screen, he lived a wild lifestyle filled with parties, drinking, and scandal. His reputation for womanizing and troublemaking was almost as famous as his acting career. Flynn was the kind of man who lived life on his own terms, no matter what anyone else thought. In 1941, at the height of his fame, Flynn built his dream home high in the Hollywood Hills. He chose 11.5 acres on top of a ravine off what was then a dusty dirt road called Mulholland Drive. The two-story colonial ranch house became known as Mulholland Farm, though Flynn privately called it his playhouse. The property included a swimming pool, tennis court, barn, and even a private casino. Flynn had secret passages built into the house with peepholes and two-way mirrors so he could spy on his guests. It was the perfect place for a man who loved secrets and scandal. Flynn died suddenly in 1959, at just 50 years old, while visiting Vancouver, Canada. He suffered a fatal heart attack, ending a life that had burned bright and fast. On the night he died, something strange happened back at Mulholland Farm. People reported that the entire house shook violently, as if the building itself was reacting to Flynn's death. This was just the beginning of what would become one of Hollywood's most documented hauntings. After Flynn's death, the property was sold to Stuart Hamblin, a famous singing cowboy and radio personality. The Hamblin family were devout Christians who hosted a gospel radio show and were close friends with evangelist Billy Graham. These weren't people who believed in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. They were practical, religious folks who had no interest in ghost stories. But living at Mulholland Farm changed all that. During their 20 years on the property, from 1959 to 1979, the Hamblins experienced things they couldn't explain. They saw the ghost of a young naked woman walking through the front gates of the property. A dark cloud was spotted hovering in the hallway, moving on its own with no wind or air current to push it. Lights would turn on and off in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep. The bottom of Flynn's swimming pool had been painted black, and several people who claimed to be sensitive to supernatural activity said they could feel something menacing lurking in its depths. The strangest incident involved Flynn's master bedroom. The Hamblins discovered that a heavy bed was blocking what appeared to be a secret staircase. But the bed would move on its own, sliding away from the stairs without any human help. They would push it back into place, only to find it had moved again the next day. No one in the family was strong enough to move such a heavy piece of furniture, and there was no explanation for how it kept repositioning itself. When Susie Hamblin, the family matriarch, was interviewed about these experiences at age 100, she still remembered them clearly. Here was a woman who had spent her life spreading the Christian gospel, someone who had no reason to make up ghost stories. Yet she confirmed that strange things happened at Mulholland Farm that defied explanation. In 1980, singer Rick Nelson bought the property. Nelson was famous for his role in The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and later became a successful rock musician. He was a big fan of Errol Flynn and felt a strong connection to the actor's rebellious spirit. Nelson loved living in Flynn's former home and often joked about supernatural activity. When unexplained sounds echoed through the house, he would laugh and say, "Oh, that's only Errol." But the ghostly encounters at Mulholland Farm were no laughing matter for Nelson's children. His daughter Tracy experienced the most frightening incidents. She often felt a presence in the house, like someone was watching her, even when she was alone. One night, Tracy came home late from work and spotted a male figure standing in the dining room. Thinking it was her father, she called out to him. But when she checked the driveway, Rick's car wasn't there. The house was empty except for Tracy and whatever she had seen in the dining room. Another time, Tracy thought burglars had broken into the house. She heard people throwing objects against the walls, the sound of chairs being smashed and glass shattering. Terrified, she hid in her bedroom and waited for the noise to stop. When it stopped, she cautiously searched the house, expecting to find rooms destroyed and belongings stolen. Instead, she found everything exactly as it had been left. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing. Every room was untouched except for one that had somehow become locked from the inside. Tracy's supernatural experiences weren't limited to sounds and shadows. Her shower door would open and close by itself while she was in the bathroom. The smell of cheap perfume would suddenly fill rooms, accompanied by a dark, oppressive feeling that made her skin crawl. In mirrors positioned opposite Flynn's old peepholes, Tracy sometimes saw the reflection of a man's face looking back at her. The face didn't belong to anyone in the house. Tracy's brother Gunnar had his own terrifying encounters with whatever haunted Mulholland Farm. His bedroom seemed to be a center of supernatural activity. Gunnar reported feeling something sit down on his bed while he was trying to sleep. The mattress would compress as if someone was actually there, but when he looked, he saw nothing. Doors in his room would slam shut with tremendous force, even when there was no wind or draft to move them. The experiences shook Gunnar so badly that they still bothered him years later when he was interviewed about living at the property. In 1987, author Robert Matson visited the abandoned Mulholland Farm while researching a book about Flynn. The house had been empty for over a year since Rick Nelson's death in a plane crash. Matson was completely alone on the property, standing by the swimming pool on a hot afternoon, trying to imagine what life had been like during Flynn's wild parties. As he looked up at the house, something caught his attention in one of the second-story windows. A face appeared, looking down at him. It wasn't quite solid, more like a transparent image of a man. The face and form stared at Matson for several long moments before disappearing. The hair on Matson's neck stood up, and he felt like he was being watched by something that shouldn't exist. Matson was so shaken by what he saw that he didn't tell anyone about it for 15 years. He convinced himself that he had imagined the whole thing, that the heat and his imagination had played tricks on him. The house was locked up tight, so there was no way a living person could have been inside. But when he later learned which room the window belonged to, everything made perfect sense. He had seen the ghostly figure in Flynn's former bedroom, the very room where the actor had spent his most private moments. The supernatural activity at Mulholland Farm wasn't limited to Flynn's ghost. Some witnesses believed there were multiple spirits haunting the property. Tracy Nelson thought she encountered the ghost of an angry woman, not just Flynn's spirit. Others reporting presences that seemed older than Flynn, as if the land itself held supernatural energy from previous owners. There were hints that the haunting might be connected to the property's history before Flynn built his house. The land had belonged to James Lancashire, and some researchers suggested there were mysteries and scandals connected to that period that might explain the supernatural activity. All the families who lived on the property, Flynn, the Hamblins, and the Nelsons, reported feeling that whatever haunted the place was ancient, older than Flynn's relatively recent death. After Rick Nelson died in 1985, the supernatural activity at Mulholland Farm seemed to grow stronger and more malevolent. The property became the center of family disputes and legal battles. Even at Nelson's funeral, family members were fighting over the estate. The house itself seemed to absorb all this negative energy, making the haunting more intense and frightening. The ghostly encounters weren't confined to Mulholland Farm. After Flynn's death, his spirit was reportedly seen on his private yacht, which was slowly rotting away in an Italian port. Crew members and visitors to the abandoned boat claimed they saw Flynn's ghostly figure walking the decks, as if he was still trying to sail away on one last adventure. By 1988, the legal battles over Mulholland Farm had been resolved. but not in a way that preserved Flynn's legacy. The magnificent house was demolished, torn down to make way for new development. With the destruction of the building, the opportunity to properly investigate the supernatural activity was lost forever. The land was eventually sold to actress Helen, who built a new home but never lived there. She later sold the property to Justin Timberlake. The ghost of Errol Flynn represents something uniquely Hollywood, a larger-than-life personality who was simply too big for death to contain. Flynn's spirit seemed to embody the same wild energy and rebellious nature that made him famous. He had built Mulholland Farm as his perfect playground, complete with secret passages and hidden rooms for spying on guests. In death, he seemed determined to remain the host of the eternal party, watching over his domain and occasionally making his presence known to the living. The supernatural activity at Mulholland Farm spanned nearly 30 years, from Flynn's death in 1959 until the house was demolished in 1988. During that time, 3 different families lived on the property, and all of them reported ghostly encounters. Dozens of visitors, workers, and researchers also claimed to experience supernatural activity. The sheer number of witnesses and the consistency of their reports create a compelling case for genuine paranormal activity. Flynn's ghostly presence at Mulholland Farm wasn't malicious or threatening. It was more like he was simply refusing to leave his favorite place. The supernatural encounters suggest a spirit who was protective of his home and curious about the new people living there. Flynn had always been a host who enjoyed entertaining guests, and perhaps his ghost was simply continuing that tradition in his own mysterious way. The tale of Errol Flynn's ghost remains one of Hollywood's most documented supernatural mysteries, a story that bridges the gap between the golden age of cinema and our modern fascination with the paranormal. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that turn out to be true, and that death might not be the final curtain call for Hollywood's most unforgettable stars. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more, please subscribe to the channel and give the video a thumbs up. It only takes a second to do, and it's free, but greatly helps the channel. Good night.